You are not going to believe some of the updates and developments that have happened in the Nancy Ing case since the first time we went over it on the first episode. Welcome to Patterns of Behavior, where we focus on the people behind the crime. And today we have an update on the first video that you can check out right here if you have missed it on Nancy Ing. It's now been over 100 days since Nancy Ing disappeared on that fateful day on October 19th while she was on a yoga retreat in Lake Atitlan, Guatemala. And since then, while the rest of us have been celebrating the holidays and the New Year's with our friends and loved ones, Nancy Ing's family has been left wondering what happened to her, where she is, and if she's ever going to be able to be brought home again. And holding on to hope for her family meant that they were keeping up with her apartment in Alhambra, California that she shares with a roommate. Unfortunately, right after the new year, they made the decision to move Nancy's stuff out. Because for all of these months, her family were just paying for her rent, holding out hope that she was going to return home back to her old life, while her roommate was just living in a half-empty house, seeing constant reminders of the roommate that she loved that is now missing. And while her family was cleaning out Nancy Ing's apartment, they actually came across what was labeled as a gift drawer. And when they opened up this drawer, they realized that Nancy, since the beginning of the school year in 2023, would buy gifts for her students whenever she was out shopping and would come across something and thought to herself, wow, one of my students who loves this would really love this for a present, and she would buy it and hold it in the drawer for the holidays. And in this drawer contained a bunch of things, including Play-Doh, games, pencil sharpeners, Harry Potter memorabilia, and even anime sweaters. So many gifts, in fact, that it took up 3 bags worth that her family ended up gathering together and took over to her school, the school that she was teaching at before she disappeared, to give to the students right before the holidays. And there were so many gifts, in fact, that it actually filled up 3 large bags. And upon finding all of these gifts, her family took them to the school that she was teaching at before she disappeared to gift to the students right after the holidays. And after Nancy Ing's sister posted about it on Instagram on the Help Us Find Nancy account, a couple of Nancy Ing's colleagues, upon seeing the post, commented under the post saying that they saw Nikki while she was there to drop off the gifts, and commented about how beautiful and how loved Nancy was and how it was a privilege to have known her. And when people ask why I do so many updates on Nancy Ing, especially on TikTok, this is the reason why. Because Nancy Ing didn't deserve whatever happened to her, and especially didn't deserve to be forgotten about and left behind in Guatemala like her yoga retreat members did when they came back, left without her, and didn't help with the investigation, specifically the one person who was out there on the lake with her, Christina Marie Blazek. And I just can't stop thinking about how Nancy Ing didn't deserve to be deserted, let alone left behind, and that she deserves to be brought back home to her family who loved her and wants to be able to lay her to rest. In addition to the fact that there are just so many inconsistencies that happen within Nancy Ing's case that sometimes doesn't even seem to make any sense at all. And we're going to cover a couple of those discrepancies on today's episode. Starting with Christina Marie Blazek's account of what she claimed happened when she was out there on the lake with Nancy Ing before Nancy Ing disappeared, that she only said through her lawyer the day after her name was released to the public by the search and rescue team Black Wolf helicopter. And Christina's claim is that after the 8 of the other 10 members of the yoga retreat returned from their kayak excursion back to shore, when it was just the 2 of them, Nancy Ing and Christina Marie Blazek, that were left out on the middle of the lake, Christina's claim was that they weren't originally out there together, but that they 2 separately decided to stay on the lake, and they happened upon each other in the middle of the lake. At which point, according to Christina Marie Blazek, Nancy Ing told her that she wanted to go for a swim. And Christina's claim is that she noticed that the water was a little bit choppier, and she advised Nancy Ing that she probably should not jump in because of the rough waters. And then Christina goes on to claim that Nancy Ng told her to get in, that the water was great, but that Christina Marie Blazek declined because she told Nancy Ng that she wasn't a good swimmer and that she also has a daughter at home that she has to be worried about. And then Christina goes on to claim that while Nancy was swimming, Nancy Ng's kayak started to drift away, at which point Christina decided to go chase after her kayak and bring it back. And supposedly it started to drift away again. So Christina went to go get Nancy's kayak again, using one of her two legs to put inside of Nancy's kayak to keep it together. And it was at this moment, according to Christina Marie Blazek, that she went to go get Nancy's kayak for a second time, that she turned around to grab Nancy's kayak. And while she was grabbing it with her back turned away from Nancy was when Nancy supposedly went under without Christina Marie Blazek being able to see where it actually happened. And according to Christina Marie Blazek, well, technically through her lawyer, she then claims that this is at the point that she started to put out a distress call and try to look for Nancy and then return back to shore when she couldn't find Nancy. Well, since the last time that we went over Nancy Ng's case, I've actually gotten a copy of the Guatemalan prosecutor's case files for Nancy Ng's disappearance. And even though I cannot share the majority of the information that's in that case file because this is still an active investigation and I don't want to do anything to impede the investigation and the case, so I'm only able to share the information that I actually have clearance to share with you from the family and the legal team. And it's very interesting because on one of the pages from that case file from the Guatemalan prosecutor's office, one of the witnesses that were waiting at shore upon Christina Marie Blazek's return stated this in their witness statement, and I quote, "Miss Christina Marie Blazek came up to me. She was crying and in shock, telling me that Nancy Ng was no longer there and that she did not see exactly if Nancy Ng had jumped into the water or had fallen from the kayak since she was so close to Nancy Ng." Well, I don't know about you, but that seems to be a starkly different and contradicting statement from what Christina Marie Blazek's lawyer put out, claiming that that was Christina Marie Blazek's account, that she definitively knew that Nancy Ng jumped in and that she had gone to go find her kayak because it started to drift away. Because this is the thing, if Christina Marie Blazek was not sure if Nancy Ng jumped in or fell in, then the rest of the story that she used to claim that it was just a pure accident doesn't really seem to fit in, because if she didn't know if Nancy Ng fell in or jumped in, let's say she fell in, then that whole story of Nancy telling her to get in the water and Christina telling her that she doesn't want to because she's not a great swimmer and that she has to think about her daughter at home and her life, that doesn't seem to fit in addition to the part where she claims that she went to go get Nancy's kayak that was drifting away. Because this is a thing, if someone fell off the kayak, I would assume the logical thing to do is to go help the person and not go after their kayak, which makes it seem like Christina Marie Blazek told a version of the story that made her seem like she was completely helpless, didn't understand what was going on, and it was completely accidental, which again, if you've ever listened to any case file from any missing person or any crimes, you know that that's also very suspicious thing to do, to try to twist the story so that you look more innocent. And even though I cannot divulge the other information and the other statements that are in this case file, I can assure you that that is just the tip of the iceberg in the inconsistencies versus what Christina Marie Blazek is claiming happened so definitively through her lawyer. Again, just barely one day after her name had been released to the public. In addition, through her lawyer, Christina Marie Blazek has claimed that she has done everything she possibly could to help with Nancy Ng's investigation, which is very odd because Christina Marie Blazek's lawyer claims that Christina spoke with the FBI as well as the Guatemalan police. However, even the Guatemalan prosecutor's office has gone on to state officially that they do not have a statement from Christina Marie Blazek because she left as early as 6 o'clock the next morning, the day after Nancy Ng disappeared, and at least 1 to 2 days earlier than all of them were supposed to leave Guatemala back for the States. And again, was the reason why the Guatemalan prosecutor's office did not have a statement on hand. However, even in the case files, there are multiple witnesses stating that Christina Marie Blazek actually went to the police station immediately thereafter on the same day. Now, that sounds really confusing, even for me. And it doesn't really make any sense why there would be so many witnesses stating that Christina Marie Blazek went to the police station, but the police station isn't able to find her witness statement, to the point where the Guatemalan prosecutor's office also does not have a witness statement from Christina Marie Blazek on record at all, not on that day. And also because Christina Marie Blazek did not respond to outreaches from the Guatemalan prosecutor's office to get a witness statement after she returned home back to Southern California. And that's because this information has not been approved to be divulged until now. And that is the fact that Christina Marie Blazek was offered a bribe by the Guatemalan police to do a couple of things, to not arrest her, and also to strike her written statement from the record so that it didn't exist at all, as if she had never gone to the police station. And I can't divulge to you what that bribe was, but there is video evidence of Christina Marie Blazek accepting and moving forward with this bribe, which then explains the reason why there's such a huge discrepancy as to, one, why witnesses are stating that they saw and took Christina Marie Blazek to the police station in Lake Atitlan. Also, the reason why the police have been like, oh no, we cannot find her witness statement anywhere, and why there doesn't exist and why there isn't one in the prosecutor's case files. Because there's also another bit of information that a lot of people don't understand about how Guatemalan legal system works. And one couple of things. The first thing is that in Guatemala, unlike the United States, where someone is innocent until proven guilty, where it is a burden of responsibility on the prosecutors to be able to prove that someone is guilty. However, in Guatemala, it actually works the other way around, where someone is guilty until you're proven innocent, at which point the burden of proof is on the suspect to be able to prove that they were innocent. If you are suspected of doing something illegal, you have to prove that you didn't do that illegal act, which means that you also get imprisoned until you are able to prove that you were not guilty. So that's fact number one. The other fact is that in Guatemala, the police are not like the police in the United States, where we have police officers that run the beat on the street, as well as detectives who investigate crimes. Unfortunately, in Guatemala, the police strictly do law and order. So they just do the beat work on the streets. And it is the prosecutor's office that's responsible for doing all of what a detective would do in the United States and actually investigate the crime, which is the reason why the police in Guatemala are able to just put someone away. And that is the end of the job for them, because the rest of the investigation and the detective work happens through the prosecutor's office. So I'm saying this to state that the part where Christina Marie Blazek accepted the bribe, that part's not that highly suspicious. Because if you're on a trip, and whether you're guilty or not, if someone disappeared and you're the only person that was out in the middle of the lake with them, then you're probably going to be looked at as a suspect, which means that if she is imprisoned, which before the bribe was offered to her, that means that she would have been in prison in Guatemala for who knows how long. So accepting the bribe to return safely back to the United States, albeit, is kind of understandable. It's the 100+ days after she returned safely back to her home in Southern California, while Nancy Ng is still missing in the middle of Lake Atitlan somewhere. That's the part that is highly suspect. Because again, according to Christina Marie Blazek's lawyer, He literally said that it was absurd that people are claiming that she did not do everything within her power to help find Nancy, because there are 4 different people, including the Guatemalan prosecutor's office, that reached out to Christina Marie Blazek, and she did not respond to any of them through multiple outreaches, even though they have on record the amount of times that she opened and read the emails that were sent to her. And I know a lot of people are stating that it makes a lot of sense for someone to get a lawyer and speak through the lawyer. And of course, I 100% agree with that. However, the people that were asking the questions were not affiliated with the government or any police entity whatsoever. And in fact, the only question that they asked her is actually not incriminating information for Christina Marie Blazek, because the questions that were asked to her specifically by Nancy's family, as well as the private search and rescue team that Nancy's family had to hire, as well as the sonar team that was also hired by Nancy's family, all 3 of them sent out emails to Christina Marie Blazek, specifically asking them, hey, we just need your help in locating the specific general area vicinity of Lake Atitlan. Because remember, Lake Atitlan is 6 miles by 12 miles wide, means that it's a huge lake, which means that it's not the traditional lake that we're used to. And in comparison wise, it's actually more like one of the Great Lakes inside of the United States, where it's just a massive body of water, which means that Christina Marie Blazek telling them the general vicinity of the lake that they were at would help the search and rescue team immensely, so that they can hone in on a specific location instead of looking for a needle in a haystack. Except it's not even in a haystack. It's like looking for a needle inside of a barn, where you could actually have someone's help in telling you specifically which haystack it's even located in. And I say all of this is not incriminating information for Christina Marie Blazek, because her account of the story is that they were out in the middle of the lake together, which was that she was helping Nancy grab her kayak, which was drifting away. And while her back was turned to Nancy, Nancy just accidentally drowned. So Christina Marie Blazek pointing out the area of the lake where Nancy drowned is not incriminating to Christina whatsoever, because it actually goes along with the story that she's claiming happened, which makes it very suspicious that she's not giving out this information that could help find Nancy's body if what Christina Marie Blazek is claiming is true and Nancy drowned. And by no means am I trying to infer that Christina Marie Blazek is guilty of anything nefarious that happened to Nancy Ng. But logically, if I can logically think about the only reason why someone would not help recover a missing person's body, logically to me would only be because they're afraid of some evidence being dug up that you can see through the body. Like, I don't know, some evidence of blunt force trauma or something along those lines. Because again, helping to find her body, if it was a pure accident, wouldn't incriminate Christina Marie Blazek whatsoever. In fact, being able to tell through the body that there was no harm done and she just drowned naturally would only help to clear up Christina Marie Blazek's name. And to add even more questions to Christina Marie Blazek's decision-making skills, recently this week, an article came out by an investigative journalist named Joe Nelson in the San Gabriel Valley Tribune that claims Christina Marie Blazek is the actual victim, where the literal title of that article is "After Monterey Park Woman Went Missing in Guatemala, San Bernardino Lawyer Facing Death Threats," where the first 2 lines of the article state, and I quote, "For the family of Nancy Ng, the nightmare began on October 19th. And then skipping the rest of that sentence to go on to the second sentence, for San Bernardino County Deputy Public Defender Christina Blazek, believed to be the last person to have seen Ng alive, the nightmare began about a month later, not the day that her friend, that she's close enough to be able to put her arm around for photos, disappeared and she indirectly witnessed drown. That wasn't the day that the nightmare began for her, but apparently the nightmare only began for her when it directly affected Christina's life. And to be honest with you, I think that line in the article is extremely insensitive, and it makes me question if Joe Nelson has some sort of reason or some sort of motive to be so sympathetic towards Christina Marie Blazek's story. And of course, Christina Marie Blazek's lawyer, Christopher Gardner, is the one that's speaking on behalf for Christina Marie Blazek in this article, claiming that Christina Marie Blazek has had hundreds of these threats, which, of course, I just need to put in a quick disclaimer here that that is not okay. Please, if you are watching this, do not reach out to Christina Marie Blazek or wish any harm upon her, because if anything, that is going to allow her to do things like this, which I believe is the final stage of her Darvoing the public. And for those of you that don't know, Darvo is a technique that a lot of people who try to escape accountability use, where they deny, then accuse, and then the RVO part of Darvo is where they reverse the roles of victim and the offender, where they go from being the offender potentially here to now victimizing themselves so that they can get some sympathy, and essentially gaslighting you into, hey, how dare you do that to me? I'm the victim here. And in this article, Christopher Gardner goes on to state that all the allegations about Blazek are untrue, and as a result, she is being traumatized all over again, which again seems extremely insensitive because Nancy Ng's family is traumatized every waking second of every day since October 19th. And then Christopher Gardner tries to spin the story by stating that he's appalled, quote, at how irresponsible they were by letting her name out on purpose, when her family and the investigation team and the search and rescue team reached out to her multiple times asking for their help. And they only released Christina's name because their backs were put up against a wall, where they felt like, hey, the only woman that can help us find Nancy's body isn't doing that. So if we can try to get her to please come forward, I mean, that's probably what I would do if someone that I loved, a family member of mine, went missing and the only person who knew what happened to her refused to let me know what happened so that I can try to grieve, find her, and move on, whatever it may be. I also would feel like, hey, maybe if we put some pressure on this person, they will talk. And in this article, Christopher Gardner goes on to state, and I quote, "So when she was subsequently accused of withholding information a week later, it simply was not true, and it created a firestorm of unfair online criticism and harassment of Miss Blazek," which again is very confusing when the Guatemalan prosecutor's office has officially gone on record to state that they do not have a statement on file from Christina Marie Blazek, and that she did not respond to them when they reached out to her to try to get the statement after she returned to the United States. And I'm not sure if when Christina Marie Blazek made these statements publicly and now is having to stand by her statements, because changing her story at this point is going to obviously make her look like a liar. But when she first originally made these statements the day after her name was finally named through the public, I don't know if Christina Marie Blazek realized that in Guatemala, there is a law that the family of the victim gets open access to the case files, which means that I'm not sure if Christina Marie Blazek knew when she was telling her side of the supposed story that she realized that Nancy Ng's family was going to get all of the information, all of the witness statements, and all of the evidence that is being built up on Nancy Ng's disappearance case, which is exactly the reason why how Nancy's family has the Guatemalan prosecutor's office case files for Nancy Ng. I mean, they have every single page of that case file. And the majority of that case file has also been sent to me to be able to review. And I'm really surprised with Joe Nelson, the investigative journalist for the San Gabriel Valley Tribune. And I believe the parent company that owns San Gabriel Valley Tribune also owns, I believe, a total of 11 publications, which means that Joe Nelson has access to also being a reporter and a journalist for those other 11 syndicates. And I know for a fact that the same case file that was sent to me was also sent to Joe Nelson. And before writing the article, Joe Nelson had to do a video phone interview with the head of the search and rescue team, Black Wolf Helicopter, Chris Sharp. And Chris Sharp actually had a transcript of this video phone call done, and he sent that transcript over to me, as well as to Joe Nelson. And in the article, Joe Nelson wrote that he asked Chris Sharp if naming Christina Marie Blazek and Eddie Ramada 4 weeks after Nancy Ng disappeared was helpful to finding Nancy Ng. And Chris Sharp is paraphrased in the article as stating that it would not have helped. Well, that's very weird because I read over the transcript a couple of different times, and at no point does Chris Sharp ever say that. In fact, the transcript shows that Joe Nelson 2 times asked a leading question where he specifically stated, hey, did you really release Christina and Eddie's name to, quote, spank them? And one of the times Chris Sharp sarcastically responded back, yes, but then later on when he was asked a second time, and at this point, Chris Sharp also said yes, yes, but then a minute later, it was clarified that even on that transcript, because they talked about it on the video phone call, and if any of us have ever done a Zoom call or a Google Meet call, which this interview was done through Google Meet, sometimes the call gets a little laggy. Sometimes the sound and the video lag with each other. So you see the lips moving, but then you hear what they're saying seconds later and things of that nature. Well, apparently that happened a lot on this phone call, as Chris Sharp told me. And there's even a part of the transcript where Chris Sharp says to Joe Nelson, oh, you're back. And then they have a quick discussion where Chris Sharp states that, you know, he has pretty bad Wi-Fi, but he knows that this time isn't him. And then Joe Nelson goes on to state, oh, you know what? I'm actually sorry. I was actually listening to and watching another interview from News Nation on my other screen during this phone call. So some of the parts where it seems like Chris Sharp is agreeing with Joe Nelson was actually him just trying to catch up on the phone call that was laggy. So, which is the reason why after the second time that Joe Nelson asked him specifically if he released Christina and Eddie's name to, quote, spank them, that Chris Sharp actually clarified by stating that, look, hey, this lake is really large. And he specifically uses his analogy where he states that help from Christina would have helped to at least narrow down this 6-mile by 12-mile lake, at least into like a Super Bowl stadium sized area, which again is still quite large, but it's not 12 miles by 6 miles large. And Chris Sharp used this analogy to state that it would have really helped immensely to hone in on the specific area that they should be looking for Nancy. And it's very odd that Joe Nelson wrote that in his article, knowing full well as all of us do, how miscommunication happens in an internet-based phone or video call specifically. Because then again, Chris Sharp then elaborated by stating that that's not what he meant, that it actually would have been very helpful in honing down the area, which sure seems a little bit shady, but could just be, you know, tossed up as a mistake until you know this fact. After reading that article on the day that it came out, because I have been communicating with Nancy's family and Black Wolf Helicopter, I actually reached out to Nancy's sister, Nikki, to state, hey, I just read this article. I know you knew about this article because Joe Nelson actually reached out to you and interviewed you as well. And I am so sorry that in this time where you're worried about your sister and trying to bring her back home and find out the truth of what happened to her, that this really vile article that victimizes Christina Marie Blazek just came out. And after thanking me, Nancy's sister Nikki actually wanted to commiserate and asked me, I don't know why Chris Sharp stated that releasing Christina and Eddie's name a month after Nancy disappeared would not have helped. And when she asked that, I was actually in the middle of reading the transcript. So I told her, from what I've seen, that didn't happen at all. Chris Sharp did not say that. In fact, then I showed her and sent her the screenshots of the transcript where Joe Nelson had a very leading question asking Chris Sharp and then capitalized on the lagging internet-based video phone call to be able to indirectly misquote what Chris Sharp said. And then after I told her that, she told me that she reached out to Joe Nelson after the article came out just to verify, hey, did Chris Sharp really say that to you? At which point Joe responded back to her with a quote, and he claimed that Chris Sharp told him, quote, and releasing the names was more of an accountability thing, dash, to publicly spank them. Which is wild because I even did a document search of that transcript PDF for the word spank, and it was only uttered twice, both times by Joe Nelson. And when I confronted Chris Sharp about this, he specifically told me that he would never use the word spank because it's one of those words that's extremely cringy for him, and that he would never ever even use that word. And when I told Chris that Joe misquoted him and lied to Nikki about it, he literally was speechless. And also in this article, Joe does not say a single thing about the bribe that happened in Guatemala between the Guatemalan police and Christina Marie Blazek, even though Nikki has already said through another news station that that's what happened, even though Joe Nelson got the same case file packet that I got, where in that packet, there is specific evidence that points to the fact that a bribe happened. Because on that video interview with Chris Sharp, Joe Nelson specifically told him, and I quote, yeah, one definitely not doing a story on the bribe. I want to be thorough in that, and I want to be the only. And then there's a little bit of back and forth, like, oh, because it's an allegation. At which point Joe Nelson specifically responds back, and I quote, yeah, and I'm not in Guatemala. I'm in Southern California. This lady works like less than 20 miles from where I'm at. So I don't want us to get a summons from her attorney, So yeah, that's something. And then he goes on to state, and this is a very litigious area. So yeah, I can't accuse a public defender of a crime unless it's literally on a piece of official document from the police or the government, which is a very weird thing to claim because without there being any statements officially from the government, Joe Nelson had no problems publishing Chris Gardner's account of what Christina Marie Blazek supposedly said had happened, about how they had done everything possible, that they didn't leave early, even though Joe Nelson got the case files from the Guatemalan prosecutor's office. And I'm telling you, these pages are very official. And it says that it's from the government. It says that it's from the Guatemalan prosecutor's office, even though he has those documents that state that they do not have any witness statements on file. He didn't write anything about that in his article, but he sure did publish Chris Gardner claiming that Christina Marie Blazek did everything she could and cooperated with the officials. So yeah, I'm having a really hard time not believing that this is an extremely biased article from a quote investigative journalist. And that's not the only inconsistencies with this case. In fact, there's a lot more, but the one that I want to cover today is the one that involves the owners of Kayak Guatemala, which is a kayaking company that the yoga retreat group rented the kayaks from on that fateful day of October 19th when Nancy Ng disappeared. Because about 3 weeks after Nancy Ng disappeared, when her case started to get some national coverage, because the Beals, Lee and Elaine Beal, the owners of Kayak Guatemala, the kayaking company that rented the kayaks out to Nancy Ng's yoga retreat group on that fateful day of October 19th in Lake Atitlan, Guatemala, went on to state a couple of things. First off, they stated that they were there and saw Nancy Ng and Christina Marie Blazek being the only two kayakers left out in the middle of the lake. In addition, both Lee and his wife Elaine claim that they saw when Christina Marie Blazek returned back to shore in her kayak by herself. And Elaine goes on to state that she saw Christina Marie Blazek being escorted by Eddie Ramada, and that they walked past, did not pay for the kayaks, and just disappeared back to their resort. And this part was always a little bit confusing to me because in my initial searches way back in November, I was being told that Christina Marie Blazek did not return back to the dock at Kayak Guatemala, but that she returned to a different dock about a couple of 100 yards away from Kayak Guatemala, which is about the distance from where the resort is to Kayak Guatemala. They are really close to each other to the point where you might even be able to say that they're like neighbors. That's how close they are. And about 2 months ago, Lee and or Elaine Beal reached out to Gray Hughes Investigates, the YouTube channel, and wrote them an email stating, and I quote, Gray, there is really nothing to see here. It was a simple case of Nancy Ng drowning. The family cannot accept this for a variety of emotional reasons. Of course, it would be obvious if the body were recovered, but it is not common for bodies to be recovered after drowning at this lake. There are scientific reasons for this. The depth of the lake is over 1,000 feet. It's actually close to about 2,000 feet. It is the largest body of fresh water in Central America by volume. The water is cold. There are underwater currents that move a body around continuously. People drown in this lake quite frequently, and most of the time, bodies are never recovered. The real threat to follow is the yoga group, specifically the leader. They left the scene without permission of the authorities and refused to talk to the authorities. I suggest chasing that thread. I do not know the name of the group leader or his yoga studio. The family will not give that information to me. Maybe the authorities know. He then also sends Gray this map and continues to write, the map shows the route that the group took when they started their paddle. The group of 10 people arrived at our kayak center at 10:30 a.m. and started their paddle around 10:40. The group all took off together and paddled west or to the right. The group returned to our kayak center approximately at noon. 8 people returned. Nancy and the other woman continued paddling to the east or to the left on their own. We watched the 2 women continue paddling for a while, and ultimately they went out of our field of vision. It was approximately 30 to 45 minutes later that the woman who was with Nancy got the attention of some workers on the lakeshore in the area on the map with a house called. She was distressed and called that I'm going to leave out. She was distressed and calling for help that Nancy had gone for a swim and disappeared. Within 5 minutes, 2 boats were dispatched and started combing the area looking for Nancy. Within a very short order, additional boats were dispatched to search the area. The Guatemalan Navy arrived around 2 p.m. The group leader indicated he would pay for the group upon their return. For our part, we would like to know the name of the yoga group leader and his business. We have not been able to obtain this from the local authorities other than her first name, Eduardo. Would you mind sharing if you find out who the a-hole is? Life jackets are always offered before the activity starts, and we highly recommend their use. Everyone in this group declined. It is not required by law in this area. The surviving woman is an attorney, so that explains a bit about her silence. I have no idea why the others in the group don't speak up. That is the mystery. No, they did not pay. We recovered the empty kayak fairly quickly during the initial search and rescue. First off, the beginning part of the email, there is really nothing to see here. It was a simple case of Nancy Ng drowning, is actually a comment that has been left on multiple of my videos on TikTok, almost verbatim that. There is nothing to see here. She just drowned is literally what has been written, which now reading this, I am almost 100% certain that that is either Lee or Elaine Beal writing from an alternate account. Also, the reason why Nancy Ng's body most likely did not float to the surface has nothing to do with the undercurrents or because the water is cold. Because as many of you may know, even if there is movement in the water, like, I don't know, an ocean, bodies will still come up to the surface because as decomposition starts to happen, gases build up within the body that make it float up to the surface, literally creating it to be like a balloon. However, the actual reason that Nancy Ng's body most likely did not come up to the surface is because of the fact that Lake Atitlan is almost a mile high from sea level, which means at that altitude, the atmosphere is less dense, which means that your body is most likely to sink because it acts differently than at sea level. But those are just parts of me being a stickler for actual facts and information. This is where the actual discrepancy comes in with what the Beals are stating. Because again, the Guatemalan prosecutor's office released official statement about the Beals. And here we go. I quote, Lee Willard Beal, who was outside the country of Guatemala since the 30th of September of the year 2023 and returns to the same on Monday, the 30th of October of the year 2023. In the same vein, she states that with respect to the disappearance of Nancy Ng, On October 19th, 2023, she has no further information since she could not notice anything since she was inside her residence and only learned after the fact that a young lady had disappeared. Which means that Lee Beal and Elaine Beal, who claim that they saw the two women kayaking in the middle of the lake, and Lee Beal, who also corroborated Elaine Beal, stating that she saw Eddie escorting Christina Marie Blazek on his own without talking to anyone else, could not have happened because Lee Beal was not even in the country on the date of October 19th, 2023. And Elaine Beal admitted to the Guatemalan prosecutor's office that she actually did not see anything because she was inside of her residence, and also told them that she only found out that someone named Nancy Ng drowned after the fact. Also, at the end of this statement from the Guatemalan prosecutor's office, they also go on to state these people who work as guards of said company and were working that day in the kayaks informed him that they sent a boat to bring the two kayaks with the young ladies who had disappeared. However, they only managed to bring one of them and the two kayaks in reference, but not to the missing lady, Nancy Ng. So he states that he has no further information to provide, which seems extremely odd that two people who not only did not witness anything that they claim to on international television, but one of them wasn't even in the country, let alone even in the vicinity or the general area or even the same town. Whereas his wife, who also claims that she specifically and very explicitly saw these supposed things, did not. She was inside of her home and only learned that someone drowned after it happened. Which is so odd to me that someone would put themselves so front and center in the middle of an investigation, putting out false information that helps to create more confusion regarding this case. For what? And this part's not in any official documents from people that know the business. Kayak Guatemala, from what I understand, it is struggling to stay in business, which means that if I had to make an inference, again, this is just pure speculation, but I would assume that the Beals saw the disappearance of a woman who supposedly drowned in the middle of the lake as an opportunity to market their business. In addition, Nancy's sister, Nikki, has stated that she has gone kayaking with Nancy before and stated that when lifeguards were offered, that Nancy jumped on it because she is concerned about safety. And as someone who works with special needs kids, I would assume that person most likely is not completely reckless because they're used to being cognizant of safety and the things that can happen. And it's very suspicious to me that the Beals gave such a detailed account of everything that happened supposedly that day with timestamps and all of that, when the one wasn't even in the country and the other was inside of her home. But then if you add in the fact that they just offered up the information at the end of the one email about how they also offered life jackets to everyone in the group and not a single one accepted it, that seems highly suspect to me because it seems like the Beals are trying to cover their end on making sure that they don't get in trouble for liability, because whether she fell in or jumped in, Nancy Ng might not have drowned, again, if this was purely an accident, if she was wearing a life jacket. And to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't even come to that conclusion enough to be able to verbalize it on this podcast if it wasn't for the fact that we have evidence of severe false information from the Beals for whatever personal nefarious reasons that they have to capitalize again, especially on a woman who disappeared in the middle of the lake and could have likely drowned. I don't know about you, but there are just so many messed up things that are happening with Nancy Ng's disappearance. But I do have some good update for you that is somewhat hopeful. So the search for Nancy Ng, the actual search and rescue for Nancy Ng, the efforts have been on hiatus since mid-December, mostly because of the winter weather that brought about really strong winds. So strong, in fact, that some of the cables that were connected from the boat to the ROV machine that uses sonar to try to look for bodies as deep as 2,500 feet into the lake snapped because the winds were so strong. So for that reason, the search had to be put on hold. However, they're hoping to bring the search and rescue team back in about 3 to 4 months once the winds have died down. Again, remember, this lake is about a mile high up from sea level. So the winds are really strong just from that alone, let alone the fact that the lake is surrounded by 3 volcanoes. So it's a very mountainous area. There's a lot of wind. And because of the mountains and the volcanoes, those winds funnel through and become really strong at times. So they're hoping to resume the search in about 3 to 4 months. They're going to be bringing back Bruce's Legacy, which is the team that has the sonar machine, as well as a team in America that is going to bring cadaver dogs. And I know a lot of us grew up thinking from movies and TV shows that dogs lose the scent once they hit water. And back then that might have been true. However, now there are currently cadaver dogs, and I believe these ones are specifically bloodhounds that not only have the ability, but have also been trained to sense the chemical differences in composition as they go over the water, which means that these dogs are able to sniff decomposition through the water. And I know a lot of you are going to be saying, but Ed, it's going to be at that point almost 7 to 8 months after Nancy disappeared. Well, the thing is, these dogs have a 64% success rate in finding bodies that have been decomposing underwater for long periods of time. So in addition to the ROV team that's able to use sonar to look for a body that deep into the water, and cadaver dogs that can smell decomposition through the water, it is starting to look like we are inching ever so closely to being able to bring Nancy Ng back home. And hopefully, if it is applicable, getting justice for Nancy Ng. And that is everything that we have so far on the case of the disappearance of Nancy Ng. I'm hoping that the next update will bring really good news that we are finally able to bring Nancy Ng back home to her family in California. And with that, thank you for joining me on another episode of Patterns of Behavior, where we focus on the people behind the crime. You can find me on all the socials at Etch-a-Sketch with a J. And if you would like to help me keep this podcast sustainable, please think about joining the Patreon that's linked below. And if you are listening to this podcast on your favorite podcast channels, please also know that there is a video version on Spotify and YouTube. And if you are watching us on YouTube, please make sure you like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you can stay on top of new episodes. Otherwise, thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.